My name is Spenser Gerber-Hatem. My senior thesis project is the first three chapters of a novel, hopefully, um, that I'm tentatively calling The Musings of Overlooked Fantasy Creatures. It's a fantasy novel that is both satirizing and paying homage to Dungeons and Dragons. It's a original story that uses Dungeons and Dragons um, copyright to based off of a campaign that I ran for some of my friends slash am still running. Um, it is broken up into three parts. Each chapter is from the perspective or follows the perspective of a different narrator. The first is a lizard folk chef. Second is a sentient magical halberd, like a poleaxe. And the third is a uh, doppelganger, a type of shape-shifting monster who works as a mercenary for hire. I'm taking an excerpt from Sean's perspective and from Ceasefire's perspective, and you'll have to wait for doggers. Um, really quick, before we actually get started, forgot to mention that in my novel I included some footnotes, even in the excerpts that we're reading from. So when we get to those, I'm going to try to paste them down at the bottom while I'm continuing speaking. Feel free to pause the video or skip over them if you don't want to read them. Cool. Let's get into it. Sean had been at the job for 2 months now, and business had been good but slow. The tournament was scheduled to start in 12-ish days, and he knew that this would be one of his last slow nights before the crowds Mr. Terracana, Drake, warned everyone to expect were supposed to arrive. That was why Sean had chosen tonight to be the night he braved the task of waiting tables. Despite being the head chef, Sean felt it was important to be familiar with all aspects of his trade, be it performing as a saucier, acting as sous chef, business manager, dishwasher, or, as loath as he was to do it, waiting tables. It wasn't that Sean disliked waiting tables and talking to the customers. Quite on the contrary, seeing a customer's happy, satisfied face, seeing a plate that had once been full of food Sean himself had stood at the grill preparing, now picked clean, was one of Sean's favorite parts of being a chef. It was one of the reasons that Sean had left his village to pursue this career in the first place, despite his family's and the entire village's misgivings about a lizard folk looking for work in human kingdoms. But maneuvering between tables, deciphering the orders the customers made, the awkwardness of a customer not enjoying a meal and asking for something different, that was difficult. Jean had trouble understanding the different accents people had when speaking common, which wasn't his first or even second language, despite its name implying universality. Shant also had strong opinions on what the recipes he served should entail, and often found it difficult to pare down a meal or add a sauce or garnish that he felt didn't fit with the dish. If the customer left the alteration up to him, that was one thing. He could improvise reasonably on the fly, but putting the sauce on the side, just taking a piece out of the dish, the flavor would be ruined, the dish would be destroyed. Switching out olive oil for snake honey was one thing. The difference there was only a mild shift in astringency. But asking for a halibut cold roast with an owlbear thigh substitution fundamentally changed the dish. It wasn't seafood, it was barbecue. Asking for a fire beetle thermidor without the crow's egg was like asking for the sky without clouds. Sure, without clouds, the sky was still the sky, and it might still look nice, but it was missing a fundamental and beautiful part of itself, a part that made the dish, sky, whole. A fire beetle thermidor without a crow's egg, or gods, at the very least a raven's egg if you were in a pinch, was just wrong. These requests were difficult for Sean to accommodate, and that had led him to a few what you might call altercations in the past, and one permanently broken fang. Many of these incidents had forced him to find work elsewhere, so he did his best to stay in the kitchen, where at least he didn't have to hear the asinine alterations people asked for. And when he was in the kitchen, regulating the nagging thoughts of mismatched recipes was a lot easier. But that only worked in the kitchen. And tonight, he was waiting tables and tending the bar, trying not to bump his large tail into anything as he navigated the dining area. Shant let out a small sigh as he glanced at the clock and saw that his shift as a waiter was coming to an end. Only 1 hour left, and there was a nearly empty dining area. He'd get an entire month of freedom before he had to don the stuffy bow tie and unflattering vest again. And, in the meanwhile, he could focus on his true talent and passion, being head chef. Sean should have known not to tempt the gods. He lifted his yellow eyes to the door at the sound of heavy footsteps, clanking metal, and odd laughter. His pleasant expression stiffened, nostrils flared, eyes wide, lips barely restrained from forming a defensive snarl. He watched as every inn, tavern, and restaurant's worst nightmare walked into the dining area. 1 hour. They couldn't have waited 1 hour. He watched the motley group of scarred people walk into his section, all a different species, wearing armor and carrying weapons. They stank of the noxious fumes that Sean had learned to dread. Magic. At least one of them possessed something with a powerful necromantic aura, which came with a particularly pungent stench. None of them looked like each other. None of them looked like they'd slept indoors in at least 4 days. None of them looked like merchants or farmers. Customers arriving at the end of a shift were always awful. But why did they have to be adventurers?
Really quick, the next chapter is Ceasefire, and for some reason during that chapter, I start reading in a weird accent or something. I don't know why. I apologize for it. Bear with it, please.
It is the opinion of the halberd ceasefire that the spear and its many formal variants, including the poleaxe, hold the best quantity of product to death dealt ratio of all weapons. Its dominance rivaled only, perhaps, by the crossbow or the dagger. Their status, however, relies heavily on the fact that assassins often favor them, as opposed to the valiant warriors who favor the spear. The crossbow specifically deserves some modicum of respect, though, to being a relatively recent but promising addition to the weaponry world. The crossbow already boasts something above 3 trillion deaths in the last couple millennia alone, or was it perhaps centuries? Ceasefire cares little for the time metrics of the fleshful people and prefers to judge the length and breadth of the world and time by kills and by war. Ceasefire had almost 150 kills since the last time it was used in true warfare. A fair number, but nothing to hold pride in. Ceasefire had killed hundreds of lesser fighters in the previous time of war. The halberd, as many spears and spear-like variations do, enjoyed using its superior reach to bite into the flesh of sword wielders. Ceasefire especially enjoyed when its hooked blade was used to drag cavaliers off their mounts, to be trampled underfoot and under hoof, before Ceasefire quieted their breath with a simple, casual dive between bone and beneath flesh. What an amazing feeling. Killing, banishing life. It is glorious. It is marvelous. It is blood. But, regrettably, that was 150 kills ago, most likely longer in terms of people years. And even that war was disappointingly short. Moreover, those dullards that were wielding Ceasefire saw the weapon as merely a beautifully and wonderfully constructed halberd of everlasting quality. whereas Ceasefire knew that it was those things and more. So much more. It was the fault of the mass of warriors, inundated with stupidity and dog-headedness that kept Ceasefire from accessing its true potential. Powerful, hidden abilities locked away. Ceasefire's arcane qualities. The power that slept deep within the Ocean Blade's depths. Any warrior could, theoretically, repulsively, pick up the shaft of Ceasefire and wield it like any other dashingly gorgeous halberd. But only the select few warriors gifted with skill would be able to wield it as it meant to be wielded, as a magic weapon. A warrior with knowledge of magic and arcana could wield Ceasefire properly, as a force of nature. Ceasefire was meant to be a storm at sea, cracking lightning that would illuminate the ocean for miles, booming thunder that would rock the earth and sky alike. All this power, bubbling, roiling, surging against the inside edges of the halberd's essence, it was desperate, manic, pleading for someone, anyone, please let it out. Those few warriors who could release this power found bolts of lightning striking their enemies where Ceasefire tasted flesh. They would find torrents of seawater erupting from the blade. These warriors, these true artisans of iron and steel, would find sudden and jagged shards of ice stabbing into the enemy flesh and freezing the wounds left by Ceasefire's sharp and beautiful blade. These were paragons of war. They were the true masters of dealing death. These were the fleshful people that were granted the highly selective, privileged use of Ceasefire's private internal well of magical spring water. This water was used only to clean blood and bone and gore off the halberd's clamshell blade and steel form. This water gave Ceasefire a glimmering shine that the weapon knew, must strike terror and awe in equal portions to all the unworthy eyes that fell upon the weapon's majesty, before they were cut out of the skulls that housed them by Ceasefire and its wielder, however. But the times when Ceasefire could access those magic powers were locked away in a distant, aching past. There were no skilled warriors to unlock those powers now. There was no opportunity for Ceasefire to feel the refreshing spring water glide across its clamshell blade or steel shaft, to feel clean and new and grand. There was no opportunity to feel the power of the ocean, the storm and snow that could enshroud the blade with fearsome, killing might. No. Now Ceasefire had been relegated to being chartered by a creature that could barely hold it aloft. The indignity. And that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope I didn't go overboard. Thanks.